Lovely. So we'll go towards the story. I'd love to hear any um anything that's metabolizing, anything that's shifting and shuffling since the first moment we met in this story up to your sharing together last week. See if there's anything new to bring into today's session. But first, let's start as we do. Let's have a moment for ourselves, a moment of settling, just letting the eyes shut down, exploring the wonderful sensation of a repeating image of a storyteller being blind. What happens when we close our eyes? Notice what you're noticing. You might like to tell one or two of your repeating thoughts that that's not what we're doing for the next hour or so, and they can wait for you here by the wayside, and we'll come back. See what else is waiting for you in the cadence of your breath. And another few more, just enjoying this, the potential of this story, the crossroads that we're at. When we get to the end, it will be one story, but right now it's still a thousand stories. Okay, and give yourself any love that you need to, any touch, any attention, any feedback for yourself. How might you care for someone else if they were sat in your chair, in your space, in your context? What would you offer them? And we'll go to our sort of quasi check-in, check-up, check back that we do here. Love to hear as many of you as are willing to speak. Yeah, what are you coming with today? What do you feel is right to say to arrive in the space here? Um, and if it's a reflection on your journey so far, all the better. If it's not, then that'll just help with the imagery and the landing and meeting whatever energy's here. So it's all welcome, whatever feels best. Okay. Okay. It feels really tender. This feels like a really tender moment, for different reasons. And I think I told you I was going on pilgrimage with this story through the county, and that was extraordinary. And yeah, it's a conversation for another time, I think. But one of the things that feels really important, whilst I have the wit to remember, was just how how present the images were for us whenever there was water. Um, and a word on sort of where we're going and how this story finishes, or how the process will finish. We'll end this. This isn't going to last forever, although you'll have the recordings. To start thinking ahead, this time next week, where will you be? Um, how close to a source of water can you be? What's your relationship to water? Even if that's a vessel that you fill, maybe from some other place than your home and carry it home or something. Um, there's a real opportunity for us at the close of this process to mark it. And I would, uh, yeah, I would advocate for the power of water after my experience in the last few weeks. I think that's enough. So, um, maybe Asher and I will send something out between with a bit more specificity, or a challenge. But if that feels enough for everyone, then we'll just get going. We'll get the horse moving. Yeah. Okay. Um, Forgive me because I'm in a couple of different versions of this story now, especially with that group. Have I been catching you up each time? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So there's a king with horse's ears, and we'll remember the images there. We'll remember enough of that to move straight past King March towards the scream that he hears in Lioness, the sunken coast off the coast of Cornwall. He ignores it. We don't. We go to the place where a woman is giving birth in a forest without her partner. She gives birth to a boy, and knowing that she's passing from the world, she names him Tristan, child of sorrow. Her handmaid is given the name, the barons are given the name, they go back into the court. The king that was absent, Meliodas, returns. They have due ceremony, the years pass. A stepmother who we never learn the name of. And if I said it before, I'll say it again. We could spend a long time in this image. Comes into the story and realizes that her children will never be in line for the power and the lands of Lioness. And so she tries to kill Tristan with poison. First moment of Tristan meeting poison as a boy, she accidentally poisons her own child and then nearly poisons King Meliodas. And so the proper rites of the time, sorry to say it, are that she is burned. Um, Harrowing moment for her that Tristan saves her from by begging forgiveness of his father. And we have our first example of a king or a central figure agreeing to a favor without knowing what the favor is. He's sent from Lioness by Meliodas when he becomes too beautiful. A young, beautiful thing who is able to engage in forgiveness is something extraordinary and difficult to be around if you haven't done your own stuff, and sends him away with a man named Gouvernail, who actually, after reflection since we last spoke, I've decided I'd prefer to just call Rudder. Um, so I'm going for Rudder, and we can talk about this a bit more as we go. But Rudder and Tristan make their way to Brittany, where Tristan makes his name as Harper Hunter Hawker. And eventually finds his way to Cornwall, where he's received by King Mark, the king with horse's ears. And after a moment of jubilance that a young hero has walked into the court in his shining glory, the recognition that this is nephew and uncle, and that the scream we began our story with was the mother, the sister. And we see Tristan now moving through a note, a moment where, yeah, to use some of the language already from this morning, everything changes. He realizes he's been carrying grief all his life. He asks if there's anything to do, any trouble to be in, any service to be in, and we learn of the tribute that's been going from Cornwall to Ireland all these years, and that no one's brave enough to face the champion they're sending. Tristan agrees without knowing really what he's signing up for. He's knighted. He gets onto a boat. He goes out to meet the Morholt, the bull of a man on the island, where they fight, they push, they bustle. Eventually, Tristan goes under the guard and Morholt goes over the top of the guard. The other way round, Morholt goes under the guard and Tristan goes over the top of the guard. The Morholt lands a poisoning wound into Tristan's thigh, and Tristan lands a fatal blow into the brain pan, into the skull of the Morholt, where a chink of his sword is lost and lodged. Tristan comes back to Cornwall. The Morholt is sent back to Ireland under black sail, the dead body of the Morholt. Or the dying man, at least. He dies by the time he reaches Ireland. Tristan is celebrated and eventually, as the weeks go by, realizes the wound in his thigh isn't healing and may never heal. And it's in the moment that he asks, how am I to live with poison? How am I to live with poison? That an old woman walks out of an oak tree. Some wounds can be healed with time, some wounds cannot. This is one which requires you to go back to where the poison was made. It's very specific about that, not where he received the wound, but where the poison itself was made. And he gets in a coracle, a rudderless boat with his harp and floats tide time, makes his way to Ireland, meets King Anguish, meets the court, is met by the young, and here's another detail that's changing since the pilgrimage. There was an old woman who was a steward of one of the churches, and she got wind of what we were doing. And they had an extraordinary tapestry of Tristan and Iseult in the church, and they had a mural painted inside her house of Tristan and Iseult, and it was something that was celebrated in that area, and she knew the story well. And when she got wind of what we were doing and she heard that we were pronouncing it as Isolde, she flew into a mild, but she was holding back, I think, a bit of a fury. She wasn't happy that we'd gone for the Germanic. So for the rest of that story, she was Iseult, the Irish pronunciation. So maybe honoring the pilgrimage and the Cornish woman who shook her fist at our pronunciations in this story, we've moved on to Iseult, 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 Iseult. So forgive me if I flip between, but we move into the first images of Queen Iseult, the sunrise, and daughter Iseult, the midday sun. And the healing and the joy as the young Iseult is sort of made apprentice to her mother and heals Tristan. He teaches her to harp, and they have eyes and they have joy of each other, and they have that particular kind of emotion passing between them where one is the healer and one is the healed. Then the sword is found, the chink in the sword is found. There's a perfect match. It's revealed that Tristan, who's been going by Tantrist, is the traitor that's been in the house of grief for Uncle Morholt, and they've been tending to him, so they can't believe it, and they have him leave. And Anguish, King Anguish, says, "I understand, but you need to get out of here," and sends him away. Tristan goes back to Cornwall and sings songs and sings songs and doesn't he sing songs about this beauty that he's met in Ireland. And King Mark, by and by, can't stand to be around the beauty of a young guy like this, or sees an opportunity, or as he says it, to keep the peace between Cornwall and Ireland, he sends Tristan back to Cornwall to fetch Iseult, a task which Tristan jumps at until he realizes that it's for King Mark's hand and not his own. And that's when his arms go numb and his chest hollows out. And he finds his way now on the Swan with rudder. And off they go to Ireland. And recognizing the energy around this being a footnote, I've experienced it to be a footnote. That Tristan lands on the coast of Ireland, and there is a dragon which he deals with, which he dispatches, and gains the favor of the court, and goes in and stands in front of Anguish with Iseult on the edge of the room, looking in, and says, "I'm here for Iseult's hand," and her heart lifts, and Anguish says, "Yes, of course." And then he says, "It's for King Mark." They make their way down to the Swan on the coast. Brangain, who is to Iseult as Rudder is to Tristan, the handmaid, is given a potion by the Queen Iseult, who says, "I see the anguish in my daughter's face. Get her to drink this when she marries King Mark, and they will be in love until they die." They all go down onto the ship. They make their way. The sun is high, the wind is lost. They go into the doldrums and they sweat in ways they've never sweated before. And despite the agony in Iseult's heart that she's on her way to Cornwall to marry a man she's never met, despite the agony in Tristan's heart that he came so close to this woman who healed him, this angel, really, and has to stand on duty. Despite those things, Iseult comes to the deck in a bid to make some conversation with Tristan with a drink in her hand. She takes a swig. Everything in her world changes. Her whole aspect changes. She gives it to Tristan. He takes it. And in the second between her drinking and handing him the bottle, he sees something. He sees a veil drops, a world opens. He's looking down into the belly of a volcano. All of those things are happening simultaneously. The volcanic vent at the bottom of the ocean where life begins is in this woman's face and in her breast. And he doesn't understand it at all. And then he drinks the drink himself and he feels it all. And he feels it all bubbling up from the deepest part of himself. And that's when the wind returns. And so they keep moving. And they're going down towards Cornwall, and the wind is blowing through the sails and through the rigging and through their hair, and they're still staring at each other. And the crew rush around and set the sail and keep the course, and still they stand looking at each other. And they fall downstairs together, looking at each other. And they close a door behind them as the ship makes its way to Cornwall. And Brangain and Rudder raise eyebrows at one another, but they don't stop it. And they make landfall in Cornwall. And Tristan jumps down and holds his hand for Iseult, who jumps down into his arms, and he places her down. And they walk in a procession to King Mark. And they go to meet him, and Mark looks at Tristan and nods. He's done his duty. Tristan looks at Mark and nods. He's done his duty. And Mark takes Iseult by the hands, and they look at each other. And Mark says, I've been waiting for you. Cornwall has been waiting for you." And Isolde furtively glances back at Tristan, who sort of shrugs. And she looks back at King Mark. and says, I'm happy to be in Cornwall. And this really is where most of the old imagery of Tristan and Iseult, this is most of what it is kind of resolving around is this period of the story. The oil paintings, the poetry, the embroidery. You'll see Isolde and Mark in a window with Tristan singing like a nightingale. You'll see Isolde and Mark walking along and Tristan around the next corner and a little sideways glance from Isolde. You'll see Tristan and Iseult tucked away in a courtyard, harping together with the barons in the background looking on. You'll see Tristan and Isolde having a conversation in the orchard, and King Mark in a tree casting his shadow down onto them, and they'll both know that the shadow's there. So they'll be having a very normal conversation at this point. The way it unfolds is Mark and Iseult ostensibly are the couple. They get married, but Iseult turns to Brangaine, her handmaid, and says, "You're going to go in the night. I'll be with him in the day. You'll be with him in the night." And actually, we get a little just the frisson of the Irish feminine sharpness. She at one point grabs Brangaine by the throat and pushes her against the tree and says, "If you tell him what's going on here, it will be the end of your life." So Brangaine gets to know Mark in the bed, and he knows no better. He can hear with horse's ears, but he's not a horse. He doesn't have the same sense of feeling the aspect, the emotion, the energy of beings within a 5 mile radius in the way that I've heard horses do. He doesn't have that sense about him. And as the barons more and more implore Mark to look at what's happening between Tristan and Iseult, the more they try to implore him, the more he turns them away. It's the same arrangement as Arthur, Lancelot, and Guinevere, where Arthur sort of knows. He knows. He does. But to admit it is just to leech honor from the entire court. He'll be the one that's lost his honor. They'll lose their honor. The whole story starts falling apart for a court when honor's lost. And whether or not King Mark actually knows what's going on and he's willfully trying not to look at it for honor or for his love, really, for Tristan and Iseult, or he just genuinely doesn't know, we can leave to our imagination. But the repeated pattern is that Tristan and Iseult are obviously up to something, and the barons know, and they're trying to tell King Mark, and he won't listen. Whittling sticks to send downstream to Iseult to say, "I'll meet you at this tree at this time. This stick means this tree. This notch means this time." Sending them down a stream past her window, singing her nightingale songs into her window. And so as time goes on, Mark has moments of sort of checking the rumor, like that example of climbing a tree, but they see that he's there. And another example of this is placing flour on the floor between Tristan and Iseult overnight to see if anyone's walked through the flour. And the first time, Tristan leaps over it. And the second time, his wound has opened a little way, and he leaps over it, and some blood is left behind in the flour. And when Tristan's roused by some of the guards and the knights to be brought to Mark, they see that there's blood on his bed sheets, and so that's the moment of it being proven. Something is going on. Something is afoot. Something's going on between these two. It's Finally, Mark has noticed. Finally, Mark has taken it seriously. So the next step is an, a medieval trial, an absurd thing, which is that Iseult is to grab a burning hot iron, and if she's telling the truth, she won't burn herself. And this is the way this goes. Tristan is taken to a high tower. There's a place near here called Roche Rock, Roche Rock. That's what I've got in my mind when I receive this image. A sort of chapel and a jail cell on a high tower, um, on on a tor on granite on cliffs, and he's sent in, and he says, before you throw me into the jail, I would like to pray one more time. Will you allow me to bow my head to God before you throw me into this prison? And they say yes. Okay. In you go, and they close the door behind him. And simultaneously, Iseult is being taken to this trial to see if she's been faithful to Mark by crapping a red hot iron. Um, so they are on their procession down towards the river, down towards a place called Malpas or Bad Path. Bad. It's um, a ford crossing across a river. Tristan, at this point, makes what becomes known as the Tristan leap. So he jumps, some people say, as far as Constantinople. There's a Cornish place called Constantine, so that might be a corruption, but he makes an impossible leap. He jumps out of a window down so far to a point that he should absolutely die. That's why they were so comfortable letting him go in to pray and closing the door behind him. The only window was an impossible sheer cliff, and he jumps it. And there's something in here about Tristan repeatedly putting his body on the line, repeatedly almost sort of trying to kill himself or trying to prove himself against the odds. And he lands it and he's totally fine, completely unscathed, just walks away from it as though nothing has happened. And he, using his wit and his guile by hook and by crook, he makes his way to the same river crossing that he knows the procession is going to be going over, and he dresses himself as a leper. He's covered in bandages. And he's on the other side of the river when the procession arrives, and he shouts across the river, no maiden as pretty as this should have to cross a river. And he goes to her, and she sees his eyes through the bandages. That's enough. Whether that was already between them or the potion, I don't know, but that's enough for her to know. He says, climb on my back, and I'll carry you over. And she does. And he wades across with her in a sort of piggyback, takes her to the other side, places her down on the side. They have one last look, and he disappears into the forest again. The rest of the procession continues, and they get to the trial. And they take the brand out of the fire, and they hold it in front of her palm. And they say, have you been faithful to King Mark? Grasp the brand. And she says, I swear that I have had no man between my arms other than King Mark and the guy that just gave me a lift over the river. And she grabs the brand, and she's totally fine. And it doesn't scathe her. And they go back into the court again, and they sort of reverse the proceedings, and they carry on with their life. And the barons, the barons, the barons. What do I even mean by the barons? The people in the court, the that part of us beneath the flowing simplicity of which is sovereign, which is lover. That the soup between the cardinal directions that are the barons, the knowingness, the tendons between the clear directions and beings within this story, the barons. They bloody know. They know it was Tristan. Of course it was Tristan. He jumped out of the window, he disappeared some moment at the river, and now he's gone forever. Of course they know. So the rumor of that bubbles away, and Iseult and Mark sort of try to make a life in the court together. But of course, Iseult and Brangain's relationship is still standing. The threat is still there. You better keep doing this thing and don't tell anyone what's going on. And then the day comes that the cuckoo, um, not the cuckoo, the nightingale is calling, and the sticks are coming down the river. And there's some gentle harping just on the edge of the wind. And one day Iseult makes a break for it, and she leaves the court and she rushes for the trees and she meets Tristan. And they fall into each other's arms and they go into the wild part of this mad animalistic relationship. They go into the wild and they start following the same sort of rules as Dermot and Grania did, if you know the story. Don't sleep in the same place twice. Don't sleep where you eat. Never go into a cave with only one exit. They live by the road rules. They move. They constantly move. And a couple of really, really significant things happen. First is they they just start they just start fucking each other. They are just, and I'm using the word specifically, they are rampantly every day, several times a day having sex. Just it starts as sex. It starts as fervent sort of release of being free, being out in the wild, being young, being in love, and then they just start getting down to kind of there's an English word which I don't know if this has traveled, but to shag, they're shagging each other, and it's not that's not a pretty word, and it's not a pretty thing that they're doing either. They get to the point where it's almost like they're trying to transcend into a spiritual plane by just fucking each other into transcendence, and it's not working, so they try it harder, and they bash into each other, and they get raw, and they get red, and they sort of start like they start mulching down, like they start getting mossy. There are mushrooms on the rib cage, you know. They stop really eating, they stop cleaning, they get hairy, they sort of become one thing, and they start to mulch down into the ground. That's the one really, really significant thing is the way that they are being with each other is there's a sort of directionlessness to it. And the other is that every night when they go to sleep, they sleep either side of Tristan's drawn sword. So they're in the midst of this, and they're shagging and they're shagging and they're shagging and they're dehydrated and they're hungry and they wake up one morning and they're looking at each other and it's just like that, just suddenly, just I don't even know if I like you. I don't know if I even like you. I don't like the way you're smiling at me right now. Iseult says to Tristan, "You're supposed to be one of the greatest hunters in the world. I don't remember the last time we had a meal." And Tristan says to Iseult, "Well, you're supposed to be the finest beauty in all the world, and I don't remember the last time you tended to your own beauty." And they start just giving each other shit. And it just falls apart, completely falls apart. Maybe this has just been a physical thing all along. Maybe that's all it's ever been. And they lie down to sleep with the sword between them. And after a really heated kind of exchange of coming to terms with how bored they might be of each other and of this life, the end of that conversation is, well, maybe we should just end this. Maybe maybe I'll go back to Cornwall, says Iseult, and Tristan says, well, maybe I'll go to sea. Yeah, fine, let's do that. I don't know what this has been about anyway. Fine. All right, see you in the morning. And they go to sleep. And as they sleep, a forester comes walking by, sees them, immediately knows who they are, and goes to the king. So by the time the king gets there, it's dark. It's dark, dark, dark night, but there is a moon. and there are shafts of moonlight coming down through the tree canopy. And in fact, there's a shaft of moonlight going straight onto Iseult's eyes. So King Mark comes into this scene and his breath catches, and he sees the light on Tristan on Iseult's eyes, and he leans up and he just sort of moves the branches around so that the light's not on her eyes anymore. And he sees the sword between them and thinks, well, maybe we have had this wrong. Maybe we've wronged them and they're out here just trying to survive. Maybe they've never done anything wrong. And King Mark takes his ring off and places it on Iseult's chest and leaves. So when they wake up in the morning, and the place has sort of been tended to in a way that neither of them have had the wit to tend it. And Iseult can sort of feel the weight of the ring on her chest like a boulder. She looks down at it and she says, Tristan, look. And he looks. And they know. They know who that ring belongs to, and they stick to their plan. And say, fine. You go back to Cornwall. I'll go to sea. And that is exactly what happens. And this is the part of the story where Tristan, if he wrote the book on hunting and forestry, if he is the greatest harper that ever lived to the point that he taught Ireland how to harp, if he is a hawker with spiritual age far beyond his earthly years, if he is the heir to Lioness, the nephew to the King of Cornwall, the slayer of the Moorholt, this is the point in the story where he becomes Tristan the sailor, and he goes to sea, and he takes rudder, and they sail and they sail and they sail. And Iseult goes back into the castle at Cornwall and tries to begin a life there. And she's happy, as she repeatedly tells herself and everyone around her, I'm happy, I am happy, I'm happy. And with only really a very small section left to finish the story off, that's where I'm going to pause to get us into our final session next week. So take a moment, again, especially if the invitation to notice the potential of this story touched you in a way, that there will come a time where this story is known to you or refreshed to you, and right now it's potential. Just noticing the feeling of that whilst something like this has potential. Just a moment or two to notice your body now, and maybe notice what's changed since we first checked on 45 minutes ago. And invoking what Asher offered you last week, rather than grabbing an image. What is it to recognize when an image has grabbed you? And we have a little bit of time to open up, see what's going on, see what's here. I'd like to offer something now that we're at this sort of stage in the process together. Prior, I've said something like, if you share what's coming up for you, you might help someone else to recognize they're not insane. That's the first thing. But the other is sort of this I heard Robert Bly talking about Joseph Campbell and how some folks have said to Joseph Campbell, "Oh, we're going to make a new myth. We're going to make new myths." And Joseph Campbell said, "Fantastic, good luck. You'll only need 15,000 years. Um, Off you go, begin." And Blythe was sort of making the point that in order for us to, or for anyone to keep a myth alive and to keep it growing and to keep it relevant for the times, the one of the access points is dreaming. What is it that we're all dreaming that's the same? What is it that's come? What are the beings that are present in a telling and in a context and in a time like this where we can say, oh, wow, well, if that's happening for all of us, that's probably in the zeitgeist. That's probably in the context of where we are. And so these shared images that come up for us, they're beyond just reflecting on the story, they're co creating it as well. And each of us will tell a story onwards from here, this story, and the changes that we make here, the little inferences, the little moments that feel important for whatever reason, that's us honoring the oral tradition. So it's beyond just what's happening for you. And it's beyond just whether or not you feel ready to share. It's worth it anyway, even if you don't feel ready. So here comes the question. Where do you find yourself in the story? How does love appear to us and how does it appear to others? What's the encounter and what's the poetry of the encounter? There's something really lovely in there. Hmm. We are very nearly there, and there isn't much more to tell. So I think next week is going to be as much about process as it is the story itself. Um, it's going to go to a question which is tender and can be hard to hold for yourself. So I really, really heartily advocate that you make some space for next week. If you're planning on coming, leave some space around it, bring some things to help you in whatever process you have, writing, a friend nearby, a phone call, whatever it is. Yeah, there's some tenderness coming next week. We could say more, Asher, I suppose. Let's have a conversation. But as I said before, water nearby is worthwhile, and prepare a space for tenderness for yourself. How